necessarily change or to share my private health information with a number of interpreters. You know, I feel like one was more overbearing, and so what was the purpose of having Kentucky One come in and take over the system on how they do it? What can I do now when I have an interpreter preference that I've always had? When my ex-partner and I went to the Lexington doctor, we had the appointment, we arrived there on site, and the interpreter didn't show up, and they said, we're going to have to cancel the appointment. It's like, well, why? And they said, well, the interpreter decided to cancel. And so I was like, no, the interpreter doesn't get to cancel an appointment. My appointment was made, and, if we're going to reschedule, then you need to say we need to reschedule or send a different interpreter. But to cancel once I've arrived on site, they did so without asking me and without my knowledge. And you're saying that if the interpreter canceled, then they should have informed you. Yes, I agree. They should have informed me, but I was not informed. But when did the interpreter cancel? Now, this happened 2 years ago or so, but I'm talking about when you came in to the office, when I arrived for my appointment, I was there, and they said, oh, the interpreter won't be here today. The interpreter is canceled. But I was already on site. I mean, what was I supposed to do at that point?
The interpreter canceled coming to her.
So if I'm on site, and I said, well, you have another interpreter available, so hold on. And so they started looking, and so I waited an additional amount of time. And they said, well, you found a way to get this worked out. And they said, no, we're going to use DRI instead. So I accepted the DRI services for that day. And the VR services, the attitude of the interpreter on the VRI services was not agreeable. Now my ex-partner, is kind of like, they didn't understand our signing, we didn't understand theirs. So I had to interpret for my partner. They're a patient, I said, this patient's not understanding your signing of the VRI interpreter because they have vision problems, and so that was the problem. So that's why I didn't like the attitude of the interpreter that was on the VRI. So those are issues that come up. We've got one more comment from the audience. Another issue that we have here is when we go into the Richmond, I have an audiologist appointment there. And when I came to the office, there were no interpreters available. And so I went into the, what do you call it? Where you check in at that desk. And I said, so where's the interpreter? And she said, well, she's sitting right there. And I'd never met her before. I didn't know who it was. And they said, well, I'm from Kcdhh. They had no license, no certification. And I said, then why do you have an Kcdhh student interpreting for you here? And so they didn't understand sign language at all. They spoke the whole time. And my mom ended up having to interpret for me. When did this occur? It was sometime last year. Do you know who that person was? No, I do not. So you don't know who that person was? No. Hospitals, doctors hate to pay for interpreting services. They look at the expense regardless of what the cost is. I understand that our health, our families are important, but the question I have is, why is money a problem for doctors and hospitals? They got tax forms, don't they have a mechanism for doing that? How do we then enforce or push them to do that? Aren't they supposed to do that? Most doctors can't say undue burden as far as money, that they can't have that as a response. I know they often use that, but no, the law is on our side, but you have to file a complaint to force them to say, oh, I can pay for it. But the problem is most people don't file, and hospitals and doctors know that. So even though, because we let it slide. Once you file the complaint, then they're forced to do something. Then they will act. Now, my husband and I moved here in 2007. We moved to 4 different doctors, running through all of them, who refused to provide interpreting services because they say they're a small office. You know, that happened before, and we've argued with them numerous times. When they hire interpreters, they complain your interpreter's expensive, and they get after me. They bring in DRI, it doesn't work well. We complain to the board at the hospital, but it's status quo. We feel like that, you know, we have to move to a more positive outcome for our problems. I know that many of you have gone through the same experiences where you change interpreters, it's frustrating. You change doctors, it's frustrating. So thank you for listening. We need to wrap this up, so we'll explain then at what our next steps are. So what our next steps are, it's not fair that you don't know what we're going to do next before we leave. I know that we have doctors' offices that pay taxes, you know. Should we use our tax dollars to pay for interpreting services? So can we use something on our tax forms where they can get some type of tax credit for the interpreting services? So I don't understand why they complain about having to pay interpreters so much. We know cost is a factor. Yes. We have one more. I called a doctor in Richmond, Kentucky. It was my dermatologist. Oh, okay, I think he is again. Is this good? Okay. Anyway, I did call make an appointment in Richmond, Kentucky for my dermatologist. And I said, have you called the interpreters? Like, yes, we've got everything worked out. And I said, are you sure? And they said yes. And so the next day I showed up at the office. I waited in the office. No one showed up. I waited for some time. I was like, what's going on? Hold on just a minute. Made a few phone calls. I knew they were avoiding me for some reason. It was 30 or 40 minutes. It was ready. So they called me into the office. And so I downloaded the app. It's in my phone now. I've downloaded the app. I'm like, what do you mean that you're downloading the app? And so they were trying to download something on the phone, and I waited forever. And finally, when we came to the office, it's like, we're going to have to write notes. And so I'm like, well, would you check what's going on here with this issue on my head? And so they burned my head, ruined my hair, treated me without fully knowing what was going on, turned me off. I walked out of their office. The communication was not there. And so I never knew what they treated, why they treated it, and I walked out of their office. Okay. Yes. Go ahead, come. I've been under the doctor's care for a number of years. My wife and I have gone to this doctor for years, had an interpreter there on a regular basis. And it just happened that my wife couldn't show up for a particular appointment, let them know. And so they let the doctor know we won't be able to show up for this appointment because my daughter was in the hospital with the flu and the like. And they were like, okay. And then about 3 months later, we returned. No, maybe it was 2 months later. We went back because her daughter was sick. We went back to the same doctor. And the doctor came in and told my wife, do you know that because you didn't show up, the interpreter is still charging me $375? And I'm like, what? $375? But you're saying the charge is like $60 or whatever? You know, if we don't show up, you know, if we show up with an interpreter, we're there for less than 30 minutes. You know, we give hugs and, you know, we take off. But you're now saying it's $60 an hour that they meet, or what the costs are for that meeting. So when they say it's charged $375, but if they don't show up, they still charge, even if you don't show up for a meeting. So it somewhat confused me as to why we had let the doctor know we weren't going to be there. We let the interpreters know that we weren't going to be there. So should I say to the doctor, you need to call the interpreter and cancel for that appointment. You know, who's going to be there and who's not going to be there. Did you show up? I did show up. Well, they need to have an interpreter for me, right? But my wife wasn't there. Well, your wife doesn't have to be there for you to get the services. So you could still have to have the services. So I was just confused by what the doctor said. Okay, the other interpreter showed up and they got charged for the interpreting fee. Yeah, we're clear on that. So what will we do? I already explained,
I'm going to need to have, I think we need to have more, not of a town hall forum, but more of a, maybe National Association for the Deaf come down, NAD. Bring them in for their legal expertise. Because I can't solve issues that you all have to do in filing complaints. You know, it's not fair that you fair the things that you're going through. I had to interpret for my mother when she did cataract surgery, and I went ahead and did that. And the issue with consumer choice, one issue why you don't see that in the ADA is because they shouldn't be using family members as interpreters. I know my mother's going to prefer me every time. Is that fair that I go in because of this consumer choice and I can't charge, but who knows if I'm going to be the right interpreter? But I was interpreting for her. So that's why you don't see the consumer choice. That's one issue. I did interpret for my mom, and he said, "You're going blind because of the cataract surgery. It's not going to do anything." And I was just shocked. I was like, what? And I was dealing with that, and I became the daughter who panicked, and I didn't interpret that to my mother. So we always need to have an interpreter. It should never be a family member. I know it's easier, and I know my mother understands me much better, but I was messed up after I heard that. Is it fair that I tell you, you have 180 days to file the complaint? You have to. You know, consumer choice is there. However, if the hospital contracts with an agency, what's that going to mean? It's not fair. I don't have the answer for that. I know it's not fair. I have a mother now who still is going into those same issues, and I can't put her in a nursing home. I can't put my mother anywhere because I'm her sole keeper because there's nobody there, and I know that. I know it's horrible. I live it. We all have to work together to find the answers, and it's not going to be easy. You have to educate yourselves, you have to educate other deaf people to use the ADA and know what you need to do. When a state agency sets up, fees go up, and that doctor wants that interpreter, and now it's under an agency, and now the fee is a little bit higher. I'm not the price fixing person. Interpreters charge what they want, but you have to understand, you have to be fair with what's going on in Kentucky and what Kentucky will pay in the East, in the West, or wherever. We're not in New York, we're not in California, we're not in Texas. They do pay more because the cost of living is higher in those states than it is here in Kentucky. Interpreters have to be more reasonable. That's just fact. And that's what I'm standing here to say. They need to be more reasonable, and interpreters should partner with the deaf community. The deaf community has to understand that why are the hospitals saying no about that interpreter or to that other interpreter that they want. When I ask them, they'll tell me no, and I'm like, well, but they can't file a grievance on an agency because the law doesn't have that procedure for an agency. So now I'm trying to look at how do you file a grievance against an agency? We need to figure that out, because we need to be able to do it. And so we need to talk with the licensure law people, or the commission needs to, we know that
Can I
that is
have
on our
one
radar on
statement about
things to
the
do.
agencies and the cost and everything? I researched. I went to, the commission has a list of all the agencies in Kentucky. I looked up every single one. I think there was 3 that don't have a website with the rates listed. Every single agency in Kentucky has comparable rates at a 2-hour standard. So this cost deal back then, it's not right. It's because all the agency rates are comparable in Kentucky. Every one of them, except for 3 that don't have the rates listed. I don't know about them. So.